see in relationship to Krishna. He says anything that appears to be a value without relation to Krishna, that it has no meaning. It's like a reflection that appears to be in darkness. It is this energy of illusion because actually everything is related to Krishna. But it's this seeing of things of not related to Krishna that allows us to have this mentality that I am the enjoyer, that I'm an independent enjoyer. So why do we get into Maya? And we're going to look at a different pressures. There's like things pushing on us to see ourselves as this body, to see ourselves as the enjoyer, that the world is here for us to exploit. It's basically, again, this consciousness of seeing things that it's not related to Krishna. Srila Prabhupada writes that Maya exists only within the mind. It's a certain state of mind. It's a certain state of consciousness. This world is mine to enjoy. Okay. So I'd like each of you, I'd like to take a couple minutes here and for people to write down what are the things that have us forget Krishna? What kind of circumstances, what kind of activities have us forget our relationship with Krishna? Make our heart like stone or like ice, where our heart is not melting in love for Krishna. So we're not going to share these lists. This is just individual. But if you could please write a list.
Shall we post here, Mataji, in the chat?
No, I said it was private.
Oh, okay.
No, this is private. This everyone's going to work on this themselves. So this is private. Okay, I'll give you another like half a minute. So what are the things you end up doing, or what situations where you forget Krishna? So then this is the big question. The big question is, why, when a person, this is the big question, which is why does somebody who wants to be dedicated to spirituality do the things or think the things that are on your list? This was, of course, Arjuna's big question. Why do I do things that I don't want to do? Why do I do things that are going to take me away from you? Why do I do things that I know are wrong? Why do I do things? So we're going to look at some reasons why we do these things that bring us to forgetfulness of Krishna. And I'd like you on your list to kind of analyze which of these affects which things on your list. So one is pressure from coworkers. So if you can see on your list, I mean, some of you aren't working jobs, but if some of you are working in a job, so you can note what things on your list are coming about because of coworkers. So, maybe one of the things on your list was gossip, or one of the things on your list was talking too much about sports, and maybe that's happening because of coworkers. So our next one is family pressures. So the family can pressure us to do things. The family can maybe pressure us to have entertainment that's not conducive to remembering Krishna, or maybe just even having this really overburdened life. You've got to do this, and 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 pressuring us. So maybe there's something on our list that brings forgetfulness of Krishna that's coming from family pressures. So I'd like you also to note anything on your list that is a result of family pressures. Like maybe your family pressures you to study really late, so you get to bed really late, you don't get up early in the morning, you don't have time for sadhana. All right, then those of you who are in school, for pressure from other students or pressure from friends. So if there's anything on your list, that's a result of pressure from friends. And this could be, even maybe devotee friends, where people are, they're talking negatively about other devotees and anything like that. So if there's anything on your list that you feel is coming from pressure from friends. And then finally, whatever's left on your list is going to be something from our own mind. Something from our own mind, something from our own desires, our own, habits we've accumulated over the years, and it has nothing to do with anybody else in our life. It's just ourself. It's just something that's coming from ourself. That's something on my screen here. Okay, so we're going to look at solutions. So we're going to start at the highest level of solution, and then we're going to, spiritually speaking, and then we're going to look at many different solutions, but again, starting from a higher level to a lower level. And before we look at these solutions, I think we're going to talk about the solution everyone thinks there is, and that is just willpower. That just by willpower, I'm going to go to bed early. Just by willpower, I'm not going to scroll through YouTube, or just by willpower, I'm not going to gossip about devotees, or just by willpower, I'm not going to eat a bunch of garbage food from the store, whatever is on your list. And the thing about willpower is it tends to be exhausted. Now, one can practice building up one's willpower. That is possible. Certainly people do that. But we find so many instances in the Shastra of great yogis who had incredible willpower. I've seen incredible willpower, more than I'm sure any of us could muster at the present time, that they could control their breathing and their eating for years together. And still, they ended up succumbing to something that had them forget Krishna. So willpower alone, I was just actually hearing Prabhupada talk about Subari Muni and how, he was meditating underwater. I mean, that must require a tremendous amount of willpower. And still he ended up becoming entangled in a materialistic way of life for some time. So these examples from the Shastra have many lessons for us, but one of those lessons is that just simply having determination and just saying, well, this is what I'm going to do, and this is what I'm not going to do, is most likely not going to solve our problem. All right, so our first solution is sadhu sangha, is having good association with very advanced devotees. The more that we have association with very advanced devotees, because we saw that a lot of these pressures come from other people. So a lot of these pressures comes from coworkers, families, friends, and so forth. And therefore, if our main social life is with devotees, especially advanced devotees, devotees that aren't going to engage us in nonsense activities, then that's going to solve a lot of our problem. It's going to solve a lot of our problem practically, on a practical level, because we'll be spending our time doing what they're doing. And on a spiritual level, it'll help us become advanced. When you're with advanced devotees, they're going to talk about Krishna. They're going to see everything in relationship to Krishna. They're going to remind you about how the world belongs to Krishna. They're going to remind you with their words. They're going to remind you with their actions. They're going to remind you by their very self. And so the more that we can be with people like that, the more our consciousness will develop like that. And we naturally will develop a distaste for seeing the world differently. The next thing we're going to look at is to change our identity. And this is the only ultimate cure. The only ultimate cure is to identify as a soul, to identify as Krishna's servant. And if we identify as Krishna's servant, then we're only going to want to do things that are service related. Now, this doesn't work long term if it's artificial. If you just tell yourself, well, I have to just be doing service, I have to just be doing service, I have to just be doing service. In fact, that can translate to just having a kind of constant busyness, which will work for some time, but eventually becomes exhausting. Krishna says we need to be moderate in eating, sleeping, working, and recreation. So just constant working all the time can be a way of sort of numbing our awareness in the name of service. So that's not what we're talking about. But we're talking about having this actual mentality that I am a soul. I am a servant of Krishna. What service can I do? And being excited about that. And the more specific that is, as we advance in devotional service, we start having a more specific idea of what's my identity, what's my actual identity as a soul. What relationship do I have with Krishna? And as we start thinking like that, then our whole vision of the world naturally changes. So our next solution is one we talk about a lot, which is Param Drisva Nivartate. Get a higher taste. This is, of course, related to having a spiritual identity. But this is a tricky or interesting point. Srila Prabhupada writes in the preface to the Nectar Devotion that everything everyone is doing is motivated by a desire to enjoy rasa. Whatever we do, we're trying to get some kind of pleasure out of it. Now, this may be a peculiar way of thinking, I suppose, for some of the things we do that are not good for us. Let's say we have a problem with overeating. And we know that if I eat too much, I'll gain weight. And when I gain weight, I'm going to feel very uncomfortable. Sitting is uncomfortable, walking is uncomfortable, and I'm going to have so many health problems. And we know all these things. So how is there any pleasure in it? But still, we're looking for some kind of pleasure. If on our list is maybe criticizing devotees, we might say, well, how am I getting any pleasure out of it? But we are. We're getting maybe the pleasure of the rasa of disgust, or we're getting the pleasure of the rasa of anger, or something like that. Everything we're doing is based on the desire to enjoy rasa. And so it's a good idea if we can think about the things that we're doing and say, what am I trying to enjoy here? Am I trying to enjoy romance, friendship? Am I trying to enjoy a feeling of caring for others, serving for others, awe and wonder? Am I trying to enjoy comedy? Am I trying to enjoy anger? Am I trying to enjoy fear, disgust, sportsmanship? And we'll find that there's some combination. Then the question is, how can I get that rasa spiritually? How can I get that rasa spiritually? How can I enjoy that rasa spiritually? Is there something that I could do for Krishna? Is there something I could read, something I could watch, something I could talk about, something I could work on that would give me that pleasure spiritually? Because we're pleasure-seeking beings. We're not going to be able to just say, well, I'm not going to have any pleasure. That will not work. We won't be able to maintain such a position. But if we say, how can I get this pleasure, as Prabhupada would say, through Krishna. How can I get it through Krishna? How can I have this pleasure in relationship to Krishna? I mean, on a simple level, we do this with substituting prasadam for ordinary food. But this is true in general. And to use this solution may take some introspection, that you really want to look at your list and say, okay, what rasa am I enjoying and how can I get this same rasa in a spiritual way? All right, another method is detachment. So when the desire arises to do or say or think or whatever, the thing that takes us away from Krishna, to be able to pull back from that desire and be the observer. So this is one of my favorite verses, Bhagavad Gita 14:22, where Krishna says, one who does not hate illumination, attachment, and delusion when they appear, nor long for them when they disappear, who is unwavering and undisturbed through all these reactions of the material qualities, remaining neutral and transcendental, knowing that the modes alone are active. So when the desire comes to eat too much, or to speak ill of somebody, or to read or watch some garbage, or whatever it is that is on our list that we're struggling with, to move back and look at that desire and say, this is just the modes of nature. It's not me. What we usually do when these desires come is we either succumb to them and say, okay, let me just do this thing, or we try to make it go away. Let me kill the desire. Let me make the desire go away. But that doesn't work, as we've all experienced. That doesn't work. In fact, the more we try to make the desire go away, often the stronger it becomes. So it's better to step back and say, again, one who does not hate illumination, attachment, and delusion when they are present or long for them when they disappear. So if delusion affects us, we don't hate it. And we don't long for illumination. We just say, oh, there's Thomas, there's Tamagun, and not think that it's me. Krishna gives another example of this in the second chapter in verse 70, where he says, just like an ocean has so many rivers going into it. Krishna says a person who's not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires that enter like river into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. So Krishna is telling us that instead of trying to satisfy our desires, we should be like the ocean. And here you see the desires aren't being repressed either. The ocean is neither getting into the river, nor is it repressing the river. It's allowing the river to go into it and keeping its own nature anyway. So again, this is this detachment. And having this detachment, cultivating this detachment, is an absolutely essential part of bhakti sadhana. It's one of the angas of devotional service given by Srila Rupa Goswami, not to be affected by the joys and sorrows and desires and so forth of the world. Okay, another option is to train an incompatible behavior. So to have ourselves do something that is not compatible with the Maya problem. So if one of my Maya problems is, criticizing devotees, I train myself to say something good about devotees. So if someone else says, oh, so-and-so is an individual, then you train yourself to say something good about it. You train some behavior that's incompatible. So if you're, having trouble with wasting your time on YouTube, then you train yourself to do something that's valuable. You train yourself to be in a study group at that time or whatever. Have some kind of recreation that's part of your spiritual life. Prabhupada says in Gita 247 that there's routine work, emergency work, and desired activities. So find some desired activities where you can't do the nonsense at the same time. Another solution is to find out what is your cue for the Maya. So in any kind of habits, there's what we call a cue, there's a trigger. Then there's the nonsense habit that we do, and then there's the reward. So we already talked about changing the reward, trying to get spiritual rasa instead of material rasa. And this is also looking at the cue. So when do you most likely do the things that put you in illusion? Is it in the evening when you're tired? Is it when you have too many things to do? Is it when your spouse gets you upset? No, what's the cue? Is it when you're around certain people? What is the thing that triggers the behavior? So when you look at that kind of trigger, then you start noticing, okay, this is a situation where I'm likely to do this thing or say this thing or whatever. And let me find another thing to do with the same trigger that'll get me a similar kind of reward. So here, instead of working on the reward, on changing the reward, you're looking at changing the routine. Another thing to do is reward yourself for the absence of the behavior. Like here you see children fighting and then children getting along. So if there's something you're doing that's wrong, then reward yourself whenever you're not doing the wrong thing. And the reward can be even just like, hey, you did well, that was great. Even saying it in your mind or doing a little, one devotee friend of mine calls it the happy dance, just, doing a little dance. So, if you have a problem with overeating, then just, wow, I didn't eat any sweet. Woohoo! And give yourself a reward. It can be as silly, I suppose, as putting a gold star on a chart. That's not just for kids. But even just saying, well done. And make sure that you reward little baby steps. One of the big mistakes we make when we're trying to reward ourselves for not doing bad behavior is that we wait until we've completely given up the bad behavior to reward ourselves. But, if you're having a problem with wasting time on social media and you go one day without it, or even 1 hour without it, yes, I wasn't doing that for an hour, and some kind of reward. Now, this one is interesting and is something people don't like to do, but it's something that Krishna does. And that is called put the bad behavior on cue. So you actually give yourself some time and place where you can do the bad behavior. This is assuming that it's not extremely destructive. But say you're having a problem with overeating, you could give yourself 1 day a month where you can have the extra sweet, okay, or something like that, 1 day a week when I'm going to be able to eat a dessert. And then what happens when you put the behavior on cue is that you're not likely to do it the rest of the time. So again, people are hesitant to do this because they think, well, I don't want to give myself any scope for doing this thing. But what happens when you put bad behavior on cue is that after a while, you'll only do it for the cue and then give yourself the cue less and less and less. So you can say, okay, I can eat a piece of chocolate candy once a week and then gradually make it, once every 2 weeks, and then gradually make it once in a month, and then gradually make it once every 2 months. And as your mind gets accustomed to doing the bad behavior on cue, you will gradually be able to stop it altogether. This is definitely something that is done in the Shastras. Another interesting technique is to take a vow. So Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur writes about this, how one can take a vow for 3 days, and then you evaluate it. And if you were able to do the vow and you like what the results were in your life, then you could you can continue the vow for another week or maybe 2 and evaluate it. And then you can maybe say, okay, I'm going to keep this vow up for another month and then up to 3 months. And each time evaluate it and say, okay, well, how did I do? Did I like this? I know some people that take a vow like every Ekadasi, they're not going to read the news. I know some people that say, I'm not going to check social media until I finish my 16 rounds. Again, it depends what is the particular type of activity that you're dealing with. I'm going to take a vow that I'm going to be in bed by 9 o'clock for the next 3 days, something like that. Now, when taking a vow, You can also keep daily track of progress. And that really helps. There's a lot of apps out there that will help you keep track of your progress. And you can track anything, just like you can track exercise, you can track eating habits, you can track whatever it is. So whatever it is you're dealing with, you can have something that tracks it. And it's very beneficial for the mind that you can check off, okay, I kept it today. I had this vow that I'm going to chant all my rounds before I do this or that. And you can check that. It's also helpful to have an accountability buddy if the thing you're struggling with is something you feel comfortable talking about with someone else. So you can have someone who checks in with you, and you check in with them, maybe twice a week, or certainly not less than once a week. And how I've been doing. It's good to have something that tracks it every day, and an accountability buddy who you can check in like every day, or maybe even once a week. Or sometimes you can join, have a group of people that are supportive. Again, that depends on who you're comfortable talking about the problem with. Okay, then there's changing the situation. So changing the situation, destroying the situation. So you can do this on a very small level. For example, let's say that your problem is you're spending an hour reading the news and you want to chant your rounds first before you read the news. There's things you can get on your phone or your computer that will block apps at a certain time. There's ways you can do what we call creating friction, making it harder to do things. If you have to take an extra step or an extra 4 steps to do the thing, not keeping chocolate bars in your house, not buying them, not keeping them at your house, so that if you want to eat chocolate, you have to make a special effort to go to the store and buy chocolate. So anything you can do that sets up what they call some kind of friction, that extra step. And again, if the problem you're dealing with is electronic, there's a lot of apps out there that will block certain things from you at certain times of the day, or block them completely, or restrict you to a certain number of time on them. You can also just simply set up your environment differently. So some problems are cured just by that. Now then there's making a huge change. And often people want to go to this as the first thing, but it really is the last thing. Making a big change in your environment. Really doing something very, very drastic. And this might be changing your ashram, going from, the renounced ashram to getting married, or going from marriage to the renounced ashram. It may mean moving to a different location. Now, again, often people think this is going to solve my problems. Generally, it doesn't. Generally, wherever you go, you're taking yourself with you. But sometimes it really does matter. Sometimes going to another place and a different sort of situation actually makes it easier to deal with whatever you're struggling with. Maybe changing your career. So, changing your ashram status, changing where you live, changing your career. And the last thing is just patience. That there are certain material attachments and certain bad habits that no matter what we do, we don't seem to be able to get rid of. And just being patient and just taking the process of Krishna consciousness and trusting that by chanting the holy name and taking prasadam and associating with devotees, that eventually those difficulties will go away. So we looked at sadhu sangha, changing our identity, getting a higher taste, finding the spiritual rasa, practicing detachment, having an incompatible behavior like spiritual hobbies and recreations, forming new habits, particularly looking at the trigger, rewarding any small steps that we do in the right directions, allowing us to do the bad behavior in a very regulated time, certain times, certain places, really restricting it, taking vows, and included in that we had charting progress and having accountability buddies, and destroying the situation either on a mild level by creating friction, making it more difficult for us to do the unwanted behavior, or having a big change in our life. And finally, we looked at just being patient and waiting for the process to work. So we have a little bit of time for questions and discussions. If anyone has any questions or discussions.
Hare Krishna devotees, you can unmute and ask questions if you have any.
Or you can write them in the chat.
Yeah, go ahead, Mahalakshmi Mataji.
Hare Krishna, Urmila Prabhu, thank you very much for your class. I was willing to ask what can help us identify things which are spiritual but actually are not related to Krishna. What is
I'm confused.
things that seem to be spiritual, but yet for oneself, those things might not be in accordance with Krishna.
Well, I think you can judge by the result, yes. Are you thinking of Krishna? Are you being spiritually enlivened? Is your false ego decreasing? I think I understand what you're asking. I'm not sure.
Yes, you do.
No,
Thank you.
judge by the result, judge by the fruit. So if I think, oh, this is so spiritual, but I'm forgetting Krishna and I'm getting more attached and my ego is rising, then either the thing I'm doing is not spiritual or I'm doing it wrong.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question, I think.
I have one question, Mataji.
Okay, the chat.
Sometimes, in the chat we have some questions.
Okay, more highlights on family pressures, how to handle especially kids for entertainment. Well, a lot of the problem with entertainment is, giving something else to do. Like I know one family that intentionally involves their kids in a lot of activities outside the house where they're not going to be glued to some kind of screen. So they fill the kids' lives with different activities and different projects where they have to actually leave the house. So instead of having to say all the time, get off your iPad, get off your phone, they have these activities. And then you can also have blocks. You can literally put blocks on electronic devices so that, you can only watch YouTube for 30 minutes a day or something like that. That's very, very doable. And there's also apps specifically for kids that restrict to certain content. So all of those things can be done. And we have another question here. Work-related often triggers reactions can slow in spiritual growth. I think if you look at the triggers, what is it at work that triggers the bad behavior? And then see it's the trigger, the routine, and the reward. So you want to see what triggers the bad behavior and then what reward am I getting out of it? And then see if you can give yourself a more positive version of that reward with the same trigger and a different routine. So keeping the same trigger, change the routine to give you a similar but spiritual reward. And yes, someone else had a question?
Nijendra Prabhu, do you have any question?
No, Prabhu. And Mataji has explained very nicely and very precise way how to do. I mean, she has already given multiple steps to control all these points which we are thinking about. So, I mean, we have to just follow those steps, whatever Mataji has suggested. So, thank you once again, Mataji. Thank you very much for this.
Right.
And sometimes if you get pressure from Krishna conscious itself, how can we deal that one? Like,
You want to be a little bit more specific? Can you give
Like
some examples?
you have a big desire, you want to preach hundreds of people, but that not yet manifested, or whatever your expectations, it's not reaching out your spiritual desires. I mean, that is for Krishna conscious only. So if you get pressure out of that, how can we deal that, Mataji?
Well, we're talking about things that Maya means something we're putting to forgetfulness of Krishna. So if your desire to preach to hundreds of people about Krishna makes you forget about Krishna, then please find something else to do. Like I once met a devotee who said, I'm very conscious of Krishna consciousness, but I'm not very conscious of Krishna. So I think what he meant was, I'm very conscious of doing this project and that project and this big thing and that big thing, but I forget that I'm doing it for Krishna. Then maybe step back and say, hey, maybe I should be doing something else that's going to help me remember Krishna. Maybe this isn't the right service for me, or maybe this isn't the right service for me right now. Maybe it will be the right service for me in 10 years. But what is the service that I can do that's going to help me remember Krishna? I mean, I was engaged in one service with very nice devotees, but I realized, much to my sorrow, that doing that service didn't put me in the right consciousness. That when I was doing that service, I got into basically a very critical consciousness. And I left it. I said, this is not something that I can do. This is, maybe other people can do it in a proper way, but I can't. It was having a service. It was something that I felt was valuable and I was good at it. But the results for my consciousness were not good.
Thank you, Mataji. Devotees, if you have any questions to deal your regular day-to-day problems, to overcome Maya, and to have a strong Krishna consciousness, you can speak up and ask questions. Mataji is very expert. Yes,
Hare
Kali.
Krishna Mataji. Hare Krishna Mataji. Please accept my humble obeisances.
Please accept mine. Hi.
This is the family pressure, means if kids are needing our presence for their entertainment.
They need your presence for the entertainment, like you have to put on a puppet show for them?
Some movie or something, they want our presence all the time, at least weekly once. So in that moment, when we are spending 3 hours, 4 hours sitting with them, at the same time, we cannot deny always saying that chant, read the books. So they want some of our time and we need to give at that time.
First of all, again, you can put the bad behavior on cue, and you can certainly find things to watch that are not damaging for your spiritual life. There are educational and valuable things to watch that would not be damaging. So this is a question of you using some discrimination and training your children to have some discrimination, to find things that are both entertaining and uplifting or educational or valuable in some way.
In the current world, everything is, even the kids shows are also, some cartoons are also imbibed with some scenes which are not appropriate. So what kind of educational videos are there?
There's a lot of families out there with the same problem. And so it's possible, it is definitely possible to find uplifting entertainment.
Okay.
I mean, there are whole channels and whole things that you can subscribe to that are going to be about geography and history and things that are actually helpful for your children's life and that are not going to be spiritually damaging. And then you can discuss these with your children, and it's not that you have to just sit there like a couch potato, but you can actually talk to them about that. And now, how is this working? And how is this working? What did this thing happen in history? And how can we understand this through the lens of Krishna consciousness? I mean, when I was running a Gurukula, we had hundreds of educational videos on all different topics. And these were things that, we watch with the children and we use them as part of our studies and we discuss them. So you can train your children to have some discretion in entertainment.
Okay, Mataji. Thank you so much.
You don't have to be their slaves.
Yeah. Mhm. Thank you very much, Mataji.
Okay, well, I should get going. This is actually kind
Okay.
of here. All right, thank you very, very much for this opportunity.
think
I'm sorry,
one more
Mataji, I have one question.
Yes, we'll take one last question.
Yeah, Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Yes.
So I think you just mentioned, Mataji, that somebody is in Krishna consciousness, but still they can't remember Krishna. So how is that even be possible? Because every activity in Krishna consciousness essentially, is meant to arouse that love towards Krishna.
Well,
So
that's us, though. In other words, I'm saying that you can be practicing Krishna consciousness, but still struggle with something that's opposed to your Krishna consciousness. Happens all the time. That people are taking up the process of bhakti, but they still have a problem with gossip, or they still have a problem with watching frivolous sports, or they have a problem with overeating, or they have a problem with something that they're struggling with, even though they're basically in the practice of Krishna consciousness. So that happens all the time. And Arjuna brought this up in the Bhagavad Gita. This isn't a new problem.
okay. Thanks, Mataji.
Thank you very much, Mataji, for your wonderful guidance, and it's very, very inspiring and practical. So let's all our team practice it and make it progress more and more in Krishna consciousness. So let's chant 3 times Hari Bol for thanking to Urmila Mataji. Hari Bol.
Hari bol,
Hari
Hari
bol.
bol, Hari
Hari
bol.
Krishna
Welcome.
Shri-
Jai.
Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo. Please visit us when you are in New Jersey, Mataji. Okay, thank you very much, devotees.
Thank you very much.
So we'll have a book distribution Prabhupada Marathon, Gita Jayanti Marathon. We'll start from 11:30 a.m. onwards. So if you are available, please join with us. It's in Pleasant View Gardens, Piscataway. So once you reach there, you can call me or Karuna Varni Mataji. So we'll try to distribute Bhagavad Gita's on the occasion of Gita Jayanti. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.